2, 3.
Welcome to Oregon Quilting, and we're happy that you're here, and we're starting a brand new year, and we even have an audience today. Thank you, thank you. So I have a few things to show you from Angela, and she started a new project. It's going to take a while. The Farmer's Wife. So this is Farmer's Wife, number 26, and it's a cut glass dish. And it's 6.5 inches?
6.5 inches square.
6.5 inches square. Thank you very much. And it's made out of scraps. You know, it's little tiny half square triangles. You did a good job.
Well, I did.
And then she did Farmer's Wife, number 54. How many of these are there?
111.
111. Okay, this is number 54, and it's the kitchen wood box. And this is also made out of scraps. And some of them were from the challenge fabric from last year and the year before. So 111, and you're making 2 a month?
I don't know, just whatever I feel like.
Whatever she feels like doing. So stay tuned for the next 2 or 3 years, and you'll be able to see the finished product. Thank you, Angela, for coming through for us again. And with all the activities around the holidays, why, people have been super busy. So I've had 3 requests, and they were pretty much for the same thing. It's, how do I start? And one person said, well, I have a sewing machine, but I don't know what to do with it. And then one person said, well, I just have no idea, but it's on my bucket list. So I thought we'd talk a little bit today about some of the things that would make it helpful if you're starting to quilt. Not necessary, you can use scissors, but it makes it a lot easier if you're going to start with strip quilting, if you have a mat. And they come in lots of sizes. They have little tiny ones. This is an easy size if you're carrying to class. I have one, thank you to the Olfa company, that is as long as this table would be, and it's wider, and it hooks together. So I could cut really long pieces. The other one I like, which is very helpful, is a rotary mat. So if you're working on a project and you need to trim it, you don't have to try to move this. You just put it on your mat and it turns, and then you cut it. And then you turn it again and you trim it. So it makes it much easier to work with. So that's one of my favorite ones, and it will end a lot of frustration, and it just makes life a lot easier to have that. Now, you need to have rulers, and there are hundreds of rulers of all different sizes. And this is just like a regular ruler, but sometimes it's good for just measuring. It also is 1.5 inches. So it's got your 1/4 inch on each side, because if you're quilting, eventually you will have 1/4 inch seams on each side. Now don't worry if you can't do it the first time. We've got solutions for that. Another handy one is a 6 inch. This is 6 by 12. And a lot of your blocks are not going to be any bigger than 12 by 12. A square up ruler is really nice. And they come in all different sizes. This is 9.5. And when Miss Amanda was doing her crazy contained quilting, she often uses a 9.5 inch. So rulers, mats. Now, if you have a mat and a ruler, you need a cutter. There are lots of different kinds of cutters. If you're doing several layers of fabric, why this works well. This also has a button. So you pop it, and then you can cut. And then after you cut, every single time, you click it. So when Miss Amanda was first starting, I would say, I'm listening, because she'd cut, and I'd say, okay, and then she'd go. Did you hear it? Click. One that I like is a smaller one, and it opens. It has two sides, and then it's open. However, what I do, now that I have arthritis, is I just use one side of it. So if by any chance my finger should slip, it's not going to be against the blade. So this is a really, this is by Olfa, and it's a really nice one. I like that one. They have smaller ones, and they have bigger ones, and they have some with fancy blades. But to start, you don't need fancy blades. Something very important, very, very important, are your scissors. This is just a little pair. Now, if you have anybody else living in your household, but fabric scissors in black marking pen, and this needs to be remarked again, we'll say fabric. Fabric in black permanent mark, and when it begins to wear off, you write it on again. And then I have paper scissors, black marking, and I do ribbon cutting with wire, and so that says ribbon, and my children all know, and now John knows too. So that's really, really important if you have a good pair of scissors for cutting your fabric. And if you don't live alone, mark them. Some of you have a kitchen drawer. I know some of you have a kitchen drawer with stuff in it, and that's where I keep my other scissors. So that's an important tip. Now, we're going to sew just a little bit. Remember, we talked about strips. The one was where you just have your 2.5 inch strips. You sew them all together, and then you cut them, and then you sew them back together. And we had the one with the long strips. So if you go the last 3 months on Oregon Quilting YouTube, you can watch that. And so you just sew the long strips together, and then you fold them and cut them in half. It's all explained in the last 3 months, I think. We were doing that. Well, we mentioned now you're supposed to have 1/4 inch seam. What if they're not coming out right to start with? Well, this was a quilt that Miss Amanda did. Now it's a wall hanging. And if you look in the square, you'll see that they're all different widths, and they're not straight seams. So she took strips that were all different widths. See if I can find, just let's fold it into a block, and maybe it'll be easier to see. Where's a block that's easy to see? Maybe those two are easy to see. Okay. So she had strips and they were different sizes. And she sewed them and sometimes they weren't even straight seams. And then she sewed them to another strip and just squared them up with a ruler. So if your seams are crooked or something, it doesn't matter. And next month we'll do one that's really crooked. I'll do one so you can see. Doesn't matter if you can't get it perfect. Now one important thing, I'll turn on my sewing machine, makes noise. This machine has a walking foot. You can purchase walking feet if your machine doesn't come with one. And it helps keep the fabric even, top and bottom, when you're sewing. Something else that's very helpful. And you can purchase these for, I think, almost every sewing machine. It just happens to be can you see that? A quarter inch right guide foot. So it goes on your machine and it has this little edge piece on it. So you put your fabric right next to that edge piece, and then when the needle goes down, as long as you keep the fabric on the edge, you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam. Now, eventually I suggest that you invest in one, and I think they're available for all different kinds of sewing machines. You have 2.5 inch strips. And 5 inch strips. So we'll sew one of those together, and then we'll cut it apart, and then we'll put it back together. Now, I do recommend when you are sewing that you sit on a chair. However, we'll see how well I do this. So we're going to take a 5 inch strip. You remember the song here, or the saying, "Here's looking at you, kid"? Was that Jimmy Durante? I think that used to say, "Here's looking at you." So the bottom, your bottom strip is going to be looking up at you. Important. Now the one you're going to sew on top of it, the right side is going to be down. So they're facing each other. Okay? If by chance you sew it the wrong way, the only difference will be you'll have the back of the fabric, and a lot of fabric nowadays, it doesn't matter if you end up with it wrong. But for this one, remember, here's looking at you, and then this goes on top. So we'll sew this a little bit. Okay, so what do we do first?
Who's looking at you?
That's right. And then the other one goes, faces it. First I need to bring up my bobbin thread. And then when I start, I hold them. And when I'm just sewing fabric, I just use the 2.5 stitch on my machine. Okay. Okay. So what we will do is, I forgot to turn on my iron. So you need to measure how wide it is. After you sew the whole thing, you're going to measure. And this is going to be 6.5. So I've cut my pieces. 6.5, so you just cut your whole row. 6.5. So I didn't sew this one quite far enough. Okay. So now we need to press. Okay, so the question was, do I always press to the dark side? And often, yes, but for this project, I'm not going to, because I'm going to be sewing down, and so it's easier for this if your seams are going down when I'm putting these blocks together. This is my special pink iron as a breast cancer survivor. So I have 2 blocks already cut. So I'm going to cut 2 more. To turn it so I can. See, I want those of you watching to know that you do not have to be perfect in order to quilt. This is supposed to be for fun and relaxation. Okay. So now we are going to sew our blocks together like this. So now's the tricky part, right? Because you want it to end up like this. So you have to sew these 2 together. So they have to face each other. If you lay them out first, then sometimes what I've been known to do is pick them up and sew them upside down. But because we have a 5-inch and a 2.5, you know that one's bigger than the other. So you know you don't want to sew them end to end like this. So it's easy. So this is a little bit easier pattern. So. So we have one set. So now we're going to do the next set. So now we have two, but if we sewed them together like that, that wouldn't be very exciting. We might just as well have sewn the strips together. So, and we need to press. And because we're going to be sewing down, this time I'm going to just sew that same strip down. So the seams are all going the same direction. So I'll do the same thing with this one. It looks like it's up. I'll turn it this way. Okay. So it looks the same to you people. Down. Okay. In order to make a block, we're going to put we're going to sew one down here. Here's looking at ya. And this goes this way. And because your seams are all pressed down, they won't get messed up as you're sewing. Then we're going to cut it off. I almost picked up a different ruler. I said use the same one. Then we're going to add the other one to it. So then when we press it, and we'd square it up since it's not exactly the same. So if it doesn't come out the same, you can fix that. We'll use our bigger board. And I do have a long ruler, which I don't have with me. So So then all we would have to do to make a square would be we could add border on that side. We could put one across the top. Got two of them. Got two. And one on the other. And then you'd have a 4-patch, and you could quilt that if you wanted and have just your first little quilt, or you could just keep adding. You added another one there and added long sides. And you could just keep adding as many blocks as you wanted. So it's kind of an easy first project. And next month, I'll do one and show you what happens if you can't sew a straight line. It works. It can even work if it's wavy. I'll show you. So, and I have one more quilt top to show. Remember we did okay, this is the same. We're just using the 2.5-inch strips. But instead of putting them, in a pattern, I changed the pattern. So it looks almost like you've got strips going down. The striped one, the diagonal stripes. So a totally different look, but the same process. So we thank you for this segment, and then we'll see you next time on Oregon Quilting.